Welcome to the Growth Officers Association Growth Series podcast. I'm Kim Pack, president at AIS Federal and board member at GOA. GOA is a nonprofit organization that creates a forum for growth leaders to come together, network, share ideas, and get education. Today, we are very happy to bring you this series from a culture perspective. And with me today, I have Morgan Higgins. Morgan Higgins, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kim. So happy to be here.
Yes. So Morgan is a partner at Blue Delta Capital Partners. And with that, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and we'll get into this.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So Blue Delta Capital Partners, I've been there about 6 years now, was founded in 2009 and really focuses on the intersection of helping companies grow. We are a true partner to our companies that we work with and provide capital, but a significant partnership along the way. We are hands-on investors. We are willing to roll up our sleeves and dig in on a lot of different things, all growth focused, and really provide that capital to sort of jumpstart a company's needs. And I would say thrilled to be talking about culture today, as I think it's one of those things that really does impact how does a company grow and how quickly can they grow.
Yeah, and for transparency's sake, I may be one of those portfolio companies, or at least in one of those. All right, well, hey, that's great. And so one of the things I'd like to do is really start with what company culture means to you. I know we've talked a lot about that, but can you let our audience in on some of the aspects that you look for when you're looking at culture?
Absolutely. I would say really in the government services industry, it's all about the people. We joke that our talent walks out the door every night, our assets walk out the door every night. And so truly it is the people that you hire from a culture perspective. I do think culture also exists in our sector in the mission that the companies serve and the organizations from a federal agency perspective that they serve. But also, how do we treat people? How do we think about that? How do we, build a business where people want to come work? Because that's all about attracting key talent, and culture really underpins that.
You know, it's funny you bring up people. One of the things that my CEO really, there's not much that angers him, but when we call our people resources, that angers him. Our people are everything to us, and we want to treat them like people, not just resources. So that really, from a culture perspective, there is a distinction.
There is. And I think when you think about it can happen at all different size companies, but when people and employees start to become a number, I think people start to feel it and they start to say, is this a place where I want to, be a part of? Do I want to help this organization grow, or am I just an employee with a number and a badge?
Yeah. So how important is a distinct company culture? When you're really thinking about it, everyone says, oh, I have a culture, and then you ask them what it is, and there's no real definition. How important is it to have that definition and to live by that?
So I think the way we think about it is a lot of times it really starts at the top. It's what is the vision for the organization? Where are you headed? You can't be all things to all people from a customer perspective or from a capabilities perspective.
Or at least not for long.
At least not for long. And so I think it really is defining, what does the company do? How do they do it well? But how? What's the how behind it? So is it the people that distinguish? Do we have key technology partnerships that are driven by our organization and the talent that we can attract? Can we continue to bolster that talent? Can we augment it in some way, shape, or form? And then in a number of the companies that we work with, there is a significant mission underpinning to what they do. And so a lot of times the mission really does drive the culture. In a lot of our organizations, we've got former government folks, we've got former military folks, we've got veterans, we've got military spouses. And so I would say all those are different, all those cultures are different. And I think most times our companies and our founders that we partner with are able to really determine that and help to articulate it, but it's also truly in the way they walk and the way they talk and the way they do things. And so you see that very much when you walk into a company. We spend a lot of time getting to know founders, CEOs, leadership teams, and talking to them about what makes their company special. What are the differentiators? And I would say culture generally is at the top of that. Sometimes it can be a bit ambiguous around what do you do, and it is that underpinning of how do you do it and who do you do it for. But we do spend a ton of time focused on that. And you'll hear that a lot when we're spending time with founders to determine whether or not there's an opportunity to have a partnership with them.
So depending on what leadership you talk to, sometimes you hear culture trumps strategy all day long, or you'll hear strategy trumps culture all day long. How do you help your companies ensure that their leadership embodies the culture? Because if it does that, strategy comes naturally. You don't have to have one trumping the other.
It does. I think it truly is laying out kind of where you're headed. So taking a look in the mirror and saying, where do we want to be 1, 3, 5, 7 years down the road? What does that look like?
Yeah.
What customers do we need and want to serve? Who can we serve and how? And then really laying out that growth plan from a strategy perspective and really understanding what are the building blocks to get there and how are we going to get there? And then I think it's who do we need to hire to get there?
Right.
And so I do think culture a lot of times fits right into that as you think about hiring key talent. One of the things that I think we see a lot of times is that the team that got you here won't necessarily take you there. And so if you're on a high growth trajectory as a company, a lot of times you may make hires, you may have those folks that have been with you for a long time, and they are a fabric of the culture. Sometimes they are up for the challenge. They want to continue the growth trajectory. They're as excited as ever about being on that journey. Sometimes they're not. And that is an okay answer. And sometimes you have to stop and say, is this the right talent to have within our organization? Should we think about this? Do they want to go on the growth journey? But I think strategy and culture go very much hand in hand, and you can't really separate the two.
So you did a nice transition for my next question. Sometimes when leadership is not ready or willing or even just wants to move forward with this new look, new feel of a company, right? Can you give us an example of how you guys have to really kind of pivot? Because a lot of times you have to get those leaders out to make sure that it doesn't create any toxicity as you get to the next level or as you're scaling all together.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say laying out clear objectives from the top of where's the company headed, being totally transparent about those objectives and giving milestones and benchmarks along the way to really understand what do we need to do to get there. And I would say a lot of times we'll have our leaders meet with folks, really talk to people out in the field, really understand what talent is available, what talent is out there. They may not be looking for a job, but you never know. Circumstances change all the time. And I think a lot of times it's helping folks understand where can they go and how can they get there. And there's multiple paths a lot of times to get there. And I agree with you. Sometimes, toxic employees can be the detriment of culture. And I do think we have a saying that at Blue Delta, if you think you need to make a change from a leadership perspective, you're probably too late.
Yeah.
And so really it is doing a little bit of soul searching, leaning on those around you, understanding, are these people helping to create the type of culture and that see the type of growth that we want to achieve? And if not, they may be happier in another organization. They may not be up for the challenge that you may want to go on from a strategy perspective.
Right. I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
Sure.
Not on the list. So you bring up a really good point. And for me, someone who's been in my job now just a year, coming from an extremely strong, very strong branded and strong culture into a company who has decades of culture, and really coming in and making sure that you fit in, but also putting a footprint into it to make sure that you can get to that next level. How would you tell leadership to handle something like that?
So I would say you're never going to conquer Rome in a day. You need to find your way of doing things while fitting into the fabric of the organization. And so being respectful of the way people do things, but also putting diverse perspectives around you and asking those hard questions, because sometimes a company may not realize that there may be an interesting perspective or a different way of doing it, especially if they've done it that way for a number of years. And that's not always right. And so I think sometimes just maybe a small challenge or a small, hey, have you thought about it this way? We're big proponents of having diversity in voice along the board, in the boardroom, as well as through leadership teams, making sure that those folks have an opportunity to say, hey, have we thought about it this way? Mm-hmm. And that we have an organization that is open-minded to hearing about different ways of doing things.
Yeah, I love that. And you know how much I care about best idea wins. And that comes from a diverse set of thinking, right? So as we move into this next question, this one's an interesting one because sometimes our market doesn't always align to how we've set up our values, our mission, our vision, all of that stuff, because the market is volatile and it continues to evolve, to change. And so what happens, or what would you tell folks to do if all of a sudden your business conditions don't match your cultural conditions? What should you do?
So I would say a lot of times we're talking to companies about what are the must-win contracts? What are the underpinnings of what you do and what is the fabric and DNA of the organization? Sometimes that's founded in a few contracts. Sometimes it's a partnership. Sometimes it's a key group of folks. Sometimes it's an innovative center where they may say, hey, we've reinvented ourselves multiple times around different things. And so really getting back to what has made you successful today. And what are the underpinnings and what can we build on from a building block perspective to get back there? Companies will have a bad month, a bad quarter, may lose a contract, may lose a recompete. Right. That happens, and that's going to continue to happen. And so making sure that you're always focused on that next objective. And I do think there's a lot of tell from a leadership perspective of how you handle bad news, and you band together. And a lot of times you'll see culture really appear in those moments. And you'll see folks within the organization say, well, I can help out here, or I can help out there. Maybe it's my other duties as assigned. I don't necessarily do this job, but I'm happy to pinch hit on a red team, or I'm happy to help write on a proposal, or we're short-staffed here. And we see that a lot of times in controversial type periods.
Yeah, and you said something that I think is poignant here, and that was hand in hand, right? So strategy and culture go hand in hand. And we know how easy it is to hurt a culture and how hard it is to build it back. And so when we look at that and we're looking at strategy, how do we keep our leaders? How would you recommend keeping our leaders agile in the moment, because we're constantly pivoting, or we're looking at something for the short-term strategy, but keeping them long-term focused on those larger goals? What can we do for that? Because those short-terms changing and pivoting like that can also change the company and change the way in which our culture looks at the way the company is aligned.
Absolutely. I would say some advice that we give to portfolio companies is it's very important for business leaders to work on the business, not always in the business. And sometimes when you're in the business, you may not see things. You may be so focused on the decisions that are right in front of you that you miss the forest for the trees. So we do encourage our leadership teams to have offsites, take an opportunity to get out of the office, talk about strategic objectives, talk about where we're at compared to plan. Surround yourself with really strong folks like independent board members that can think about, hey, here's a different perspective, because they're not in the business every day. They're hearing snippets. They're getting the out brief in a board meeting, but they may have some really interesting ideas and some different perspectives to share. And I think a lot of times taking a minute, picking your head up and having those conversations will really help you become a better leader and thus be able to radiate the culture back down into the organization.
Yeah, I like the perspective of the independent folks coming in, right? I know you mentor a lot. I know that I mentor a lot. And having a company mentor that board, that advisors who can really come in and give us perspective and from their experience, their education. And it's just very different than looking at around the leadership table every time, right?
It is.
It does make a big difference. And from that perspective, one of the things that I think has really changed the landscape of how businesses work is COVID. And I know we talk about before COVID, after COVID. That's not going to change anytime soon. And one of the things that really set us back in a place where culture sometimes is so important is that in-person meeting, right? Yes. The in-person coming to the office. And, we still have a hybrid and in some place fully remote. Now, there are companies that were fully remote a long time ago, but now that everyone is still kind of in that remote/hybrid approach, how do you maintain a culture that was built on in-person, in-office?
It's fascinating. And I would say we have a myriad of companies, and all of our companies do it differently. And I definitely believe there's not a one size fits all. Every company is different. Every leadership team operates differently. Everybody has a different cadence, and being able to be flexible and be a little more understanding around, time and demands and when to be in the office and when not, because candidly, you do want to get the best talent. And a lot of times these days, that comes with some type of remote hybrid. We really encourage people, when there is an opportunity to have an in-person meeting, don't just have a meeting for the sake of having a meeting, but if it makes sense, try to establish some guardrails around when to be in the office and why. And make those clear. I think that's one thing that can be a bit ambiguous to talent is, should I be here? If the CEO is there and the leadership team is there, should I be there? But they're not saying it, or they're not, and I absolutely believe lead by example, but I do think if there's the expectation that you'd like to have an in-person meeting, making that clear and understood that, that's an opportunity, but then making yourself available before, after, to, network with folks. We've seen a lot of different things work. I would say, every company does it a little bit differently. Trying to engage employees and sort of meet them where they're at. So we've seen a lot of employee advocacy groups pop up, and really folks that have common interests. And sometimes it's about the mission. Sometimes it's about a contract. Sometimes it's personal. Hey, we like to get together and run after work, and joining together, 3 or 4 of us at the office is a nice way of doing that. So we see a lot of those things come up. I would say we've had great success across the portfolio companies with doing both in-person type meetings and in-person type networking things within the organization, town halls and things like that, as well as virtual. We have one of our CEOs that every Friday morning has a half hour, and it's a virtual coffee, and it's different people from all up and down the organization, and there's no agenda associated with it. It really is just a get to know, ask what questions are on your mind, and I think gives him an opportunity to hear what's going on in the organization and make changes on the fly for things like that. But you do have to work at it. And I would say you have to work at it more so now than you ever have, and finding those ways to come together as an organization.
I guess it's not enough now to put a conference room on the invite without a virtual connection, because ultimately they're going to call you and say, where's the virtual invite, right?
Yes.
It's not even enough. It can't be subtle. It literally has to be probably your best communication.
I think that's right.
In the company itself to really build it.
And I think, we've had some portfolio companies say, hey, we're going to do lunch Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Sometimes perks like that bring people back into the office. I think sometimes not. Sometimes people say, I don't care. And so finding the way to, what we have seen, and what I will say, one thing that's been really interesting is making sure that, we've got a lot of portfolio companies that have folks on site and they don't have a remote option. And so making sure that you're thinking through things like that and benefits like that for those types of folks. And if you want to have a meeting and they're on site, perhaps you go have the meeting closer to their site, at a hotel versus having them come to headquarters. Always come back. So we've done creative things like that. I would say the other thing is a lot of people, a lot of times are tied to a name and tied to a brand. And so you do see things like, hey, staying out in front of the employees and, having branded swag for people to take and making sure that they feel a connection back to headquarters. But we also see very interesting things like Slack channels and text chains and Microsoft Office and chats and things like that, where it may be common interests that folks have that, have nothing to do with work, but it's just a group of people that have a common interest at the organization and they want to share, what recipe they made the night before, things like that. And so I do think it's figuring that out, what works for your organization,
as long as they're
harnessing
connected,
it. Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's the main thing, is keeping them tethered to the organization.
That's right.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And one of the things that we have found is, as we're looking at this, and our company spends a lot of time on well-being. Well-being is extremely important to us. It's a big part of our benefits. How, and I want to place this correctly, right? So how important is having happy and healthy employees to the culture of a company? You can't do everything, but how, that well-being is so important.
It's so important. And I think a lot of times CEOs, leadership teams may ask a lot of their employees. They may ask them to do their day job and their night job. And there will be periods of time where they may be working more than they worked, the prior month or things like that. And so being aware of that, making sure that you are thinking about it and talking about it and seeing, do we need to add more resources? Where are we at from a resource perspective? But realizing that it's also okay to ask that of them, knowing that it may be a short-term push. We focus a lot on employee wellness and thinking through it. We see a lot of portfolio companies that are doing things together, see a lot of opportunities to run 5Ks together or do more and more. We're seeing folks from an offsite perspective do things that are more physical in nature. So maybe it's get together and take a hike, or maybe it's getting a group of folks together and going skiing in the winter, things like that, replacing those historical happy hours and things like that, which is a lot of fun to see. And we encourage our portfolio companies and to get everyone involved in the organization. Everybody's a little bit different in their interests, and I do think the tone it is set from the top. The other thing we've had a ton of success with, and it's been a lot of fun, and I think has changed since COVID, is really service-minded type opportunities as a company. Yes. And so making sure that you're providing those avenues for people to give back for causes that are important to them, and for them to have the opportunity to share with their employees and their friends and family at the office, hey, this is a cause that's important to me, and I'd love to get you all involved somehow. And so I'd say we've had great success across the portfolio, as well as Blue Delta. We brought together our executives from the portfolio and really did a service event, and it was very well received. People really enjoyed it, and I think it was an opportunity to give back. And there's only so many hours in the day, and so if you can network with some peers and talk about some hard challenges over doing something, for an organization and doing some good, people are really for that.
I was really excited. We had a group of people run the Army 10 miler a week ago, and it was a fun event. But I had not seen this before. We had a tent, we had sign making stations and games, and we had people come in who weren't running 6 a.m. On a Sunday morning in a lot of crowd. To come down and root our folks on. And, it was for St. Jude's. Great, opportunity for us to do some kind of donation. And so I agree that well-being, it might not look like a happy hour all the time. It might be in a different form. So, well-being to me is something that a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about culture. It's usually about people, but not how those people are feeling and all of that all the time. And so, thank you for those perspectives, because I think it's really important too.
And I do think it's helpful, right, in your role, you recognizing that there are people doing that within AIS, and that there are people that have decided that they want to come together over a shared interest and shared perspective and a shared organization that they're passionate about. And that's really important. And it's a lot of fun.
Right. And there's no reason that the company can't support that and get behind it.
That's right.
Right? Having a give back a program like we do, we can match, we can do all those things. So there's a way to build that into the culture of the company. And I'm really excited to see it happening. And I'm really excited that I get the invites too. That doesn't always happen. So I'm really excited for all of that. One of the things that I think is so important, that we're talking about this well-being, we're talking about people and employees. How do you hire for culture fit? Usually in an IT company, we're looking at capability, certifications, technical prowess, right? But how do you handle that whole side of culture?
Gut. So a lot of times you'll sit across the table from someone and you'll say, would I want to share a cup of coffee with them? Would I want to hear about their day? And I think there's a lot associated with that. So I think that first and foremost, I think the technical certifications from an IT perspective, that's table stakes.
You're right.
It's really, does this person have, from an organizational perspective, the vision and the shared vision to say, this is where we're going and this is why, and I'd like to be a part of it. I also think a diverse set of people interviewing them makes a big difference. And so sometimes we'll have a diverse set of folks. A lot of times, as board members, we'll get asked to interview key talent, and we'll all ask a different set of questions based on different experiences and get to know them in a little bit of a different way and come out with a different perspective on culture. And I think that's very important in really understanding kind of will they fit longer
Right.
term. And then also recognizing you're not going to get it all right. And that is okay. You're going to make some hires, and especially in a hyper-growth organization where you're really focused on hiring and you're hiring opportunistically,
Right.
you may not get all those hires exactly right, or someone may not turn out to be who you thought they were, or they may have personal circumstances that make it that it's not a good culture fit. That's okay. And just knowing that you can, make a change and move on and do something different and try something else, that's an okay answer as well.
So your portfolio of companies, idealistically, they're all growing, right? Hopefully they're all growing and at scale, right? Anytime you start to bring that many people together in an organization, it's hard for the culture not to be, I don't want to say changed, but that's the wrong word, but at least constrained. And there's could be issues there.
Yes.
How would you handle that? Because again, what you said before is who got you to this level may not get you to the next, but what culture you had may not be able to carry you to the next either.
Some of that is good. I would say some of that, we do focus on. Some of that is sometimes you need some new talent, new ideas, new fresh perspectives. Being open-minded to that talent, that fresh perspective, and really hearing what they have to say, I think can be good. You do need to be mindful, and you do need to watch kind of what's going on within the organization. Take a look at talent metrics and make sure that you're thinking through, are there a significant amount of voluntary separations? Are you having issues on certain contracts? Is that a culture fit, or is it a work-life balance fit, or is it something going on there, and making sure that you're asking the right questions and spending the time to really get to know and understand and dissect issues as they come up. Because there will be issues. Everything's not smooth sailing. It's never up and to the right all the time. It's a lot of times one step forward, 2 steps to the side, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that's okay.
So, you talk about, having, sometimes you have an issue, you're taking 2 steps back, whatever the case may be. What are some of the biggest mistakes is such a harsh word, but what are some of those things that have happened that have really impacted culture that you've seen?
The biggest thing is people. The biggest thing is knowing that there might be someone who is toxic within the organization, and they're out there talking to folks and sort of undermining where the strategy and the culture may be headed, and not making a change, or not seeing it, turning a blind eye to it, and or realizing that, wow, this may be something that I need to address head on. I think also transparency is very important. And as companies grow and as they think about doing things like acquisitions, being transparent about the why behind it,
right,
and how this fits into the strategy, and giving people an opportunity and a forum to ask questions is really important, and I think really helps the culture, because people start to really understand, oh, there's a buy-in here. It is from the top down and the bottom up, and there's a meeting of the minds of where we're headed and why. So I think a lot of those things are very important, and realizing that if you do need to make a change, it's not always a pleasant thing, but you can, give people the red carpet treatment on the way out. And again, they may be happy at a different organization.
And I will say, it doesn't always have to be at leadership level.
No.
There's a lot of grassroots things that happen within a company, and culture really is most of the time at that grassroots with all of the folks who are really working together hand in hand. So one of the things that I have seen is, a leadership team who says, I have an open door policy, but the door's always closed, right? Like, oh, I'm always busy, I'm not available, or whatever the case may be. And we've seen that from a leadership side, go all the way down into program management and all of that. And when folks hear one thing and see the other, it really puts a strain on what's happening within that organization, and it does hurt the culture itself.
I tell our leadership teams all the time, your actions speak so much louder than words. And
right.
So if you want folks to, feel comfortable walking into your office, walk around and talk to them. see what's going on. Ask them how things are going. Ask them what they're seeing. Ask them what would they like to change. And sort of get their perspective. It may not be something that you want to change. It may not be something that you view needs changing, but knowing that is power. Knowing and understanding kind of, are there different perspectives out there, is really important.
And the why. Why do they think that, right?
That's right.
Maybe there is something to it you just don't know or haven't heard of yet, right? I think, as I look at this, and maintaining that essence of culture is not always easy. And one of the things that I have seen that good companies with good cultures do is their communication plan is set to help the whole organization and build culture into that. And so have you seen anything else that or like that?
Yes, very targeted communication plans. I would say people these days have communication plans for how do they want to communicate to key employees? How do they want to communicate to their customers?
Right.
What does their brand want to be? What does their website look like? What's their social media presence? And really having that tied together and a key strategy around that and the why behind it.
Right.
It was funny. I was sitting in a board meeting a couple weeks ago and somebody said, we do a lot of great mission work. We don't necessarily say that. No one understands from a mission perspective what we're doing. Really interesting perspective.
Right.
I know the mission of the company because I'm working with them day in and day out, but someone from an outsider's perspective said, this is really great stuff. We need to tell folks what we're doing. And so highlighting that on an employee town hall, highlighting that on a social media post to the extent that we can, is really important.
Yeah, I like that. I as someone who runs our marketing organization, when I look at communications, there's always an internal and an external, no matter what. And there's usually not one branding campaign a year. There's usually several that tie together, and, making sure that you're hitting everything. One of the things that opened my eyes a little bit, I hadn't seen a whole lot of this in the past, is when when an organization's employees are posting about stuff, about their organization, or citing something they've done or highlighting someone, right? For the company to go back in and repost and share with a message and all of that really shows how much that company is behind those employees. And so that was a strategy that I saw that I thought, wow, I don't necessarily see that often, especially the bigger the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it's an interesting and a powerful strategy from a communications perspective to culture.
I also think it's important to do it internally as well as externally. So sharing with folks, hey, this person participated in this growth opportunity here, or this was a really key opportunity that somebody maybe doesn't sit on the growth team, but played a key role in. And I think highlighting that gives people perspective and helps them understand, how could I play a role in that? How can I be a part of that going forward? And gives them a real insight into, hey, here's a real life example of how this worked. And then from an external perspective, absolutely. I think we think about networks as concentric circles. And a lot of times companies will have a different network than their employees. And there may be some overlap, but there's a significant amount of non-overlap. And that's a really positive thing to be able to continue to get the messaging and the branding out there. But I agree with you, really helps employees feel tethered to the organization when they feel like they've got the weight of their organization behind them.
From a perspective of scale, a small company could go from 4 employees to 30. A mid-sized company could go from, 40 million to 200 million with just a couple of wins. The strain that puts on a company, what does that do to culture?
It's tough. A lot of times why companies come to us is because they are either experiencing that level of growth or want to experience that level of growth. We encourage companies to think about that. We encourage them to think about a lot of times making those key hires before you get to that point where there is true strain. And so it is uncomfortable to do because a lot of times you're betting on the come and you're making an investment that may take 18 months, 2 years to really pay off. But it's, making sure that companies know and understand kind of what does that look like, that they believe in the vision. And I would say some roles you may hire for that, some you may not, but being okay living in the uncomfortable a little bit to say, hey, we may be over hiring a bit we may be thinking about that and making that next key hire so that it's not so strained as you're getting through those tough periods. I also think laying things like that out, laying activities like that out and picking your head up and saying what's coming down the pike 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters from now. And, thinking about things like from a growth perspective, bid concurrency and
Right.
where are they coming, where are the bids coming? Do we have a significant overlap? Sometimes you can hire really
Strategic
great
hiring,
folks. Sometimes you just need search support.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really great 1099 folks, and relying on people like us to sort of help source those is really helpful and important. And a lot of times we know the culture of the organization, so we can say this might be a good fit, maybe this person might not. But there's a lot of really great organizations out there that can help provide that level of search support if it's not a key hire that you need to make, really leaning into the growth strategy.
So on that note, if you're comfortable, would you consider or mind sharing kind of a scenario or situation where you've seen something like that happen within your portfolio?
Absolutely. So I would say we try to get our companies to scale. We push them from a growth perspective because a lot of times the leadership teams want to bid on more things than they currently are. So we had a situation, last summer, where a portfolio company came to us and said, we just won this huge contract vehicle. The first 5 task orders are coming out in the next 6 weeks. And candidly, we didn't have time to hire full-time
Right.
people that would help get us there. So we all stacked hands and said, let's stack rank the ones we know we need to go after. Let's see where we're at. Let's give ourselves an honest assessment of where we're at. And let's fill in the gaps with 1099 support, with surge support, realizing that this was a place and time. We knew we needed to get through it. We knew we ultimately probably would hire into those roles,
Right.
but we didn't have the time to really execute on a full-time strategy. And we were successful. We got all the bids out. We bid everything we wanted to bid. I think there was one that sort of said, hey, maybe this doesn't exactly fit down the middle of the fairway for us. And so let's take a step back on that one. But helping prioritize that, being a sounding board, really understanding that, and then not being afraid to, you will pay a little bit more for things like search support and things like 1099 support. And being
Short
okay
term.
throwing short term,
Right.
but
You
being
pay
okay
more.
throwing some resources
Yeah.
at it to make sure that if you're going to, take that swing, making sure that you're taking the swing in a really positive way.
No, I like that. And, as I think about it, and, it's sometimes very hard to see long term because you may have 5 bids out at the moment and you just need that surge support, but it might be dry in December, or
Yes.
whatever the case may be. So I think that's a smart way of looking at it. I know that when you're doing your strategies, it's a place to actually make sure you're putting in for it.
Yep.
But one thing that I love about a really open, transparent culture is asking people who might want to get involved, who might want to learn how to do proposals, who might want to step up and give some time from that perspective. Knowing who those people are really can help in a pinch as well.
Absolutely. And I would say that's where we see those internal stories really highlighting, hey, I enjoy doing this. I'd love to get involved here. I didn't even know that we needed that help.
Yeah.
That can really highlight those as well.
Love that. We're gonna pivot a little, and one of the things that's so important in our market today is innovation. Everyone talks about innovation. Everyone talks about emerging technologies. How do you balance innovation with consistency and culture? Because innovation is disruptive. It's the point of it, right? How do you balance that?
I think you have to think through it. Most of the companies that we work with tend to be fairly innovative. I think most of that tends to come from the top. Most of those folks say, if I'm not growing, I'm shrinking. And so I would say a focus on it, making sure you're communicating it, but the why behind it, again, is very important.
Yeah.
And so, the government doesn't always do things in the same way. And
Right.
you may not have this, the next iteration of the contract may look and feel very different than it looks today. And so understanding that from an innovation perspective, Understanding where you can help around the margin on certain contracts. And is there an innovative way of thinking about this? Maybe it's not totally revamping the whole process, but maybe it's one piece of the process.
Right.
And then sharing that from an organization perspective around a best practice. Hey, we did this here. Can we do this there?
Yes.
And so I think that's where we see that grassroots type innovation campaign really work out very well. In highly innovative technology companies, I would say a lot of times they do have an innovation center. Their employees really love to get in and tinker and play, and providing an avenue and a space for that within the organization a lot of times is a key differentiator and really helps to attract talent. So we see a lot of our companies investing in things like digital sandboxes and places for people to really, think about things and determine things and play around a little bit with, avenues where they may be really helpful on certain contracts, but there may not be a billable need for them right now. But they're sort of doing that again as the other duties as assigned. A lot of times folks just want that opportunity to say, hey, I've got this idea. I'm thinking about it this way. Can I do it that way? And so I think there is a lot of times some growth that can be achieved based on that type of thing.
And I think with a company like Blue Delta, one of the things that I see most often is you guys really encouraging. It's okay to do that innovation. Not only is it okay, it's a must to continue your growth.
Yes.
And so having that backing to push along with leadership, sometimes, internally it's hard, you don't necessarily get the same understanding of the employees unless it comes from somebody from an independent or outside voice sometimes.
Yes.
And so I've seen Blue Delta do that in the past. And I think it really does push the strength of how technology can fit in, or how processes can fit in, or strategies can fit into the culture itself and build even stronger.
A lot of times it's a differentiator from a talent perspective.
Yes.
So it's that talent that comes to our organization may be burnt out for one reason or another, may want that ability to go do that for, a month or so and really just kind of flex a different muscle. And if they have those opportunities occasionally, I think a lot of times it scratches an itch for them as an employee and can be a real talent attractor from an organizational perspective.
What does Blue Delta look at as success? You want to share a success story with us?
Absolutely.
From your perspective, not your portfolio.
So I would say we think about growth in a lot of different facets. There's one success that was a ton of fun. So we had a company that was doing really mission critical work for an intelligence community customer and really making a difference in those employees when they came to work every day and how they thought about it. We had grown that organization. We were kind of doing things in a different way. It was, if you meet these three things, if you want this in the intelligence community, they were the provider. And so we saw an adjacent opportunity at a sister Intel organization and really said, wow, we could do the same thing over there that we're doing here from a growth perspective. So really that horizontal growth play, taking the capability from one customer into an adjacent customer. But what we didn't have was customer intimacy. And so we thought about, hey, how do we get that? How do we achieve that? This isn't one of those customers that you can walk in the front door. And so we decided to make an acquisition.
Buy
it. Very small acquisition.
Yes.
And candidly, it was a partner of the company. And it was someone that they had been working with doing really mission critical work, but had a presence at that organization, a very small presence, and the founders sort of said, I don't want to ruin my culture, but I also see the value of being a part of perhaps a little bit larger of an organization.
Right.
And I see value associated with my employees. And so we spent a lot of time thinking through that. There was only 15 employees, but we had a full integration plan. We had a full communication plan. We had a full making sure that we didn't lose what was really special about that organization, because that was one of the key reasons why we were thinking about acquiring it, and that they felt that they were a part of the larger go forward organization. Fast forward 18 months and we continued our capture, and we successfully won that contract that we were looking at and really provided us the avenue to really make a difference across from a horizontal growth perspective. And that was a lot of fun. That was one that sort of said, wow, a small acquisition, I do think, was the linchpin around making sure that we could continue to achieve our strategic objectives, But we had to be very careful because it was a different, it was a different culture of employee. It was a different type of person.
It's not just a tuck-in.
It's
right?
not just a tuck-in.
Right.
These are people. This is their livelihood. And they show up to work every day, and all of a sudden they're going to have a different name on the door. What does that mean? And how do we help make sure that we can envelope them into the larger, broader organization and answer their questions, make sure so that they feel really good about it. So that was a ton of fun, big success. And I think ultimately a really great outcome for everybody.
That's great. Thank you, first of all, for coming in and spending time with us, Morgan. It's been a pleasure. I always love spending time with you. But you've really given our listeners something to think about as they're listening to this podcast. Some great tips and tricks and things to truly, muddle over to decide whether or not it makes sense, right? With that, any last thoughts for our listeners today?
I would just say, people ask me this a lot, and I was thinking about this question as you wrote it down. I'd say more and more it's harnessing your superpower and figuring out kind of what differentiates you from different people and making sure that you're sharing that with others. And so I think people ask me a lot kind of how do you differentiate yourself? And I'm a connector. I love connecting people. I love helping people. And I would say knowing kind of your strengths and sharing those with the community and opportunities like this, I would say that's kind of my biggest piece of advice.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And with that, that's a wrap. Thank you so much. I'm Kim Pack with the Growth Officers Association. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you or hear you or you hear us at the next podcast.